In addition to color manipulations, another very important category of pixel manipulation is the neighborhood operation, which are manipulations like filters, blur, sharpen, median, emboss, operations that take into consideration the neighborhood of a pixel when they're running. So let's look at some of the more useful examples in Nuke. Obviously, the blur node, which as its name implies, will blur an image. Blur in Nuke is very fast, so you don't have to be too shy about using blurs of even very large radius. Of course, where would blur be without a sharpen to go along with it? But one thing I want to mention about sharpen versus a lot of other filters is even though linear light is typically a good thing, on filters like sharpen that happen in a perceptual space, oftentimes applying them in a linear light color space is actually not ideal. And I've wired up an example here to show you why that's the case. So here I'm sharpening Marcy. The sharpen in Nuke is an unsharp mask, which means it takes the lapellation of the image and then subtracts it from the original image to enhance the edges. But because the fact that HDR images in floating point can get very strong values in bright areas like Marcy's hair here, sometimes an operation like this will have too much energy in areas where there's very bright areas to begin with. So the inverse, or I should say the result of the lapellation, is an overly strong result, which will sharpen the hair way too much compared to what you're getting, say, on Marcy's face here. So one workaround that you can do to fix that is to put the image into a nonlinear space while you're working. So I'm intentionally going to make the image log again, which is a more perceptual type of color space. I'm going to do the sharpen, and then I'm going to reverse the log. And this is another reverse out type of workflow, like I mentioned earlier. So I'm applying the sharpen in a nonlinear color space intentionally, and you can see the result is actually much more pleasing. So most of the time linear light's a good thing. Sometimes it's not, and you have to know when to take control and hack things a little bit. So in this case, I'm applying this unsharp mask. Here's the radius. This is the amount. I'll turn up the amount and reduce the radius a little bit. And there we have it, sharpened in a nonlinear color space. The median filter looks at the neighborhood of a pixel by a certain radius and then takes the median of the pixels in that radius. So if I put in a size of 1, that means it's looking outside each pixel by a radius of 1 and then taking the median of all those pixels and making it the result of the output. A lot of people like to use this to clean up mats that have little holes in them like this. So if you think about the fact that this will look outside, and when it looks around and finds the median of all the pixels, it'll realize that it's too dark compared to its neighborhood, and it should just fill that little hole. So let's apply this median to just the alpha, and there we have it. Even just one pixel radius is enough for this pixel to sort of collapse to the local color there of the neighborhood, and then all those little holes are filled. Something to be aware of, though, with median filters is they tend to be very expensive to run, and they'll also eat up all the details along the edge of a mat, not just the speckles. So you got to be careful with them. The erode dilate operation is also useful for manipulating mats. You can use it to grow and shrink a mat. So here I am applying an erode dilate to the entire image, but we're looking at the alpha. We'll look at the entire image in a second. So erode will make the alpha channel collapse in on itself like this, and dilate will make it grow larger. And it's very crude, so you've got to be careful with this. You can't typically use it to control a final quality map, but we'll learn workflows where it can be handy. Let's look at the whole image here while we do it. You can see that it will erode in areas of lesser energy into areas of greater energy, and vice versa. So you can use it sometimes to grow. For example, to clear the sky here, we could use it to clear the whole sky. And if we drop down on blur real quick, we could create a nice smooth gradient for the sky, for example. Here it is on just a CG alpha channel. It'll grow and shrink the alpha. But you've got to be careful with that. For denoising images, there's a really great denoise filter in Nuke called Denoise. And it's particularly useful for grainy footage. In fact, that's what it was designed for killing grain and video noise in footage. So you have a video clip that's got a bit of noisiness in it. Here's the red, green, and blue channel. To use this, you drop down the denoise filter and select a nice smooth area in the background that has no detail, and it will use that to profile the quality of the noise in the shot. It's GPU accelerated, which is great. Keeps it from getting too slow because it's a very computationally intensive algorithm. Typically 100% is almost too much on many shots, so you can detune it a little bit and then kill all the grain without losing the detail. And we'll be using this more in some of our more advanced workflows down the line, but it's definitely worth knowing about, especially if you need to pull a key on noisy footage. Another category of filter, and we're just going to look at one example here because it's one of the more prominent examples, are filters that require an additional input to drive them. The ZD Focus is an excellent example. So this render of teapots has a depth channel in it, which defines the distance of each teapot into the scene, how far away it is from the camera. This ZD Focus filter can use that information to simulate depth of field or defocus. So let's look at the image again. By default, it expects it to come in on the depth channel. So it's looking for this channel here, depth Z. And it's also GPU accelerated. Right now it's running on all channels, but if you wanted to speed it up, you could run it on the RGBA only. The way you use it's pretty simple. You pick where you pick the mode of math that you want it to be. In this case, I'm using it in depth mode, which is how the Z buffer was generated with the expectation of using it this way. And I'm having it output the direct result. So using it's pretty simple. You just pick where you want the focal point to be, and this will color pick from the Z buffer and use that to drive all the math. And it's fairly fast, which means oftentimes you can use it interactively and see what you're doing. So see, as I pick here, let me exaggerate this a bit. I'm going to increase the amount of defocus so that it's more obvious what's happening. As I pick here, it focuses there because it's picking the Z buffer there. There's a lot more to this node, and we'll be covering it a little bit later in the semester when we use a project that uses all its controls. So that's a quick introduction to some of the more useful pixel filters in Nuke. I invite you to explore the rest of them, and don't be shy to use them when it's appropriate.